You read these stories of American innovators, the Wright brothers, Goodyear, Edison, most of whom uneducated, who tinker their way to brilliant inventions. You were whoever you invented yourself to be. Red tape makes people go brain dead.
You said there's three major changes needed to restore authority here.
It's all about rebooting the system. We treat law like it's the 10 Commandments or something, but it's the 10 million commandments. AI offers an incredible opportunity not only to help do things, but also to help validate things. Well, I think the American people are sensible, and most Americans know the system is broken.
CEO and co-founder.
Joe Dale, the founding partner of
Volunteer co-founder Joe Dale.
We all know that our government doesn't work as well as it could in America. Infrastructure takes decades to fix. There's money wasted and stolen everywhere. Philip has thought about this longer than anyone I know, and I followed his work as an inspiration for many years. He has frameworks on how a whole new operating system and a whole new approach to government that puts back in responsibility, human judgment, and accountability could fix everything. He's written some great books. The best-selling author, his latest book, Saving Can Do, it's about how to apply the American spirit to fixing our government. He has some really clear frameworks for policy leaders for how to do it. Let's hear from Philip. Welcome to American Optimist. Really excited to have with us today Philip Howard, you're the founder of The Common Good, best-selling author. I've been a fan of your work for a long time. You're really one of the leaders in government and legal reform in America these days. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, Joe.
So, Philip, you started Common Good in 2002, right?
Right.
Over 20 years you've been doing this. Actually, I don't want to bias our listeners against you because I agree with and love so much of your work, but you used to work, I think, with Al Gore as well and others. Like, what was your background?
Well, I'm a lawyer and who got interested in the dysfunction of government. Before that, I'd worked as an economist, doing public policy work at the Oak Ridge National Lab and other places. But I happened to write this book called The Death of Common Sense in 1995, and it became a bestseller. And so Al Gore and Bill Clinton didn't want the Republicans to have it, so they glommed onto me, and I ended up working on their Reinventing Government initiative.
There was some clever stuff from that side in the 90s. It was more of a bipartisan thing back then to acknowledge government should be less stupid.
Yeah, that's right. And they did some projects when Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House and such. So some things got done. Nothing big, to be honest, except for welfare reform.
We both have different views on this, and a lot of them overlap. In my world, it was really the 1970s and the late 1970s. They put in a bunch of rules that really broke government, really stopped us from firing people, stopped us from measuring their merit. You refer your book, I think, to the 1960s as a problem as well. What's the history of how things broke here?
Well, I think the genesis of the red tape state is the guilt arising out of the 60s. Then the changes occurred in the 70s and the 80s. So you're right that for example, the Civil Service Reform Act in 1978, which made it impossible to hold anybody accountable, was at the end of the 70s. But there was a kind of a fatal theoretical flaw that they committed, which was to try to create a government that was better than people. They wanted to create governing as a kind of a software program where if you had a 1,000-page rule book, you just comply with the rules, and you could have an extensive procedure, and you prove by objective evidence that your answer is correct. And if you didn't like it, you have a right to complain. And it's just led to this morass.
Yeah, just basically thousands and thousands and thousands of rules and taking out human judgment, which is the opposite of what you argue for. So your newest book, Philip, is called Saving Can Do, How to Revive the Spirit of America. Reading this reminds me of a lot of your other work, which is great. You've been hitting on some of these key themes for a long time. Like where did this one come from?
It came from the fact that I have an appointment at Columbia, and we were hosting a forum about DOGE in the spring. And I realized in talking to some of the experts that that they had been raised at a time when the notion of humans using judgment was no longer part of how they even conceived of governing. They thought of governing as just a legal compliance model.
Just purely following 10,000 rules.
Yeah, or proving by objective evidence that someone isn't working hard, or proving somehow by objective evidence that the benefits of the transmission line outweigh the harm of building it through a pristine forest.
So rather than a boss saying this person is not working out, that's not how they think of the world. They want to have just rules.
Yeah, they want to have a rule that you can demonstrate that they're not working hard. And of course, it's all been, the motives were, I think, generally good. Let's don't have bias and, let's make sure everything is done correctly. But if in the workplace, for example, it's been perfectly counterproductive. Everyone knows when someone's not telling the truth. So you go, so you have an interaction with someone, or you're giving someone a job review, and you're not saying what you really think. Well, what do they think? They see that you're not telling the truth, so they think it's bias, right? The whole point was to avoid bias. Instead, you've kind of exacerbated the sense that there is bias.
One of your main arguments, and we go into it more, but it's to let people take responsibility again and to judge them from how they do. What does it mean to have accountability and responsibility?
Well, in my world, law is a framework of authority for public officials, for example. We could talk about it in a free society as well. But law is a framework for authority. And within that authority, someone makes decisions using their judgment. And if it's an important decision or we don't trust people, you can have a check and balance like the Constitution has. If somebody else to approve the decision, and if they do a lousy job, they get fired. That's accountability. But we don't have that now. Everything is legalized. Follow the rules. And then if we have any oversight, the question is, did you comply with the rules? Not did you do a good job, or did you actually help the person.
There's no basic common sense and judgment. And did you fail or did you do a good job? But let's go to the theory of this again, because so our founders obviously had a certain view of how this should work. And John Adams famously argued we want a government of laws, not of men. But you're saying we almost went too far, where it's not just laws, it's thousands of prescriptive things. Like, was John Adams wrong, or was he saying something else?
Well, John Adams was a lawyer. He was a very good lawyer. But in his day, law, and until, the 1960s and 70s, law involved using judgment. Judges use judgment. Everybody used judgment. And so when he said a government of laws, he meant you didn't have a potentate who could throw you in jail because they didn't like your political views. That we have a principle in the Bill of Rights for freedom of speech. So that's fine. That's a legal protection. He didn't mean central planning. He didn't mean there's no such thing as a rule book telling you exactly how to organize your office and workplace.
Yeah, there's no regulatory state when he was talking about that at all. So the right and the left are arguing over the size of government, but would you say that neither side has a view of how to make the government actually function properly?
Yeah, so there are two really big problems with the modern red tape state. The first is a problem that all institutions have, which is they take a life of their own. Sediment piles up like in the harbor, and you can't get anywhere. We have 162 STEM training programs, and in the federal government, nobody goes to see if they work or consolidate.
There's no accountability for these things. There's no accountability.
It's just, and so you can't get anywhere. So government's long overdue for a spring cleaning. We treat law like it's the 10 Commandments or something, but it's the 10 million commandments. It's actually 150 million words of binding federal law and regulation.
150 million now.
150 million. Almost all written since 1970.
Yikes.
The Constitution, by contrast, is 7,500 words because it's a framework of authority with checks and balances, not an instruction manual. Mm-hmm. So we do need to clean it out. But the second problem, which I alluded to, is the philosophical problem, is that we don't actually have the idea that officials and everyone else have to have room to make sense of daily choices. That law is supposed to be a framework, not an instruction manual. And so when you have 4,000 worker safety rules, most of which are completely self-evident, it doesn't actually help. There's studies of this. It doesn't help worker safety. It actually hurts worker safety because, figuratively speaking, people have their noses in the rule books and they trip over the saw. to make anything work, if anybody's ever done anything knows, requires you looking around and adapting and using perceiving and using your common sense.
Yeah. I want to get to some more specifics around how to fix things. I remember infrastructure is an area we talked a lot about in the past that I think this applies really well to. But before we get there, let's go to the frameworks of your book, because I think there's some inspiring ideas that are tied to this. Your first part of your book, I think you divided into 3 sections, is called Striving. How to recover America's magic. And I like how you talk a lot about the pioneer spirit, I refer to it as the frontier spirit of our country. What's uniquely American about that energy?
People owned their choices. In the old world, you were born in a certain place, you stayed in a place. It was very hard to move upward or do anything. And so you had a very constrained life by birth. You come to America, well, at the beginning, there's a wilderness all around.
Yeah,
you have to adapt. You have to deal with the Native Americans, the
the frontier is existential, right?
Yeah,
it's
really
like if you screw up out there, you're in much more trouble than you screw up back home.
But it also is a place of incredible opportunity, and so people can innovate and invent. And you read these stories of American innovators, the Wright brothers, Goodyear, all these Edison, all these people, most of whom uneducated, who tinker their way to brilliant inventions. And it was a place, and Tocqueville talks a lot about this, people took pride in the fact that they woke up in the morning and they owned what they did, they owned their values, and they owned their community. They worked with others, what he calls self-interest, rightly understood. So we had this sense of, this incredibly liberating sense of, instead of being cabined in a place, you were whoever you invented yourself to be.
I think that's really interesting, is to own your community and take responsibility for your community. I feel like that when the federal government stepped in and handled a lot of these local problems, it actually took away that sense of ownership and duty for a lot of our communities.
Completely. We can talk about it, but red tape is a form of central planning. It's just telling people what to do. And not only does it not work for the central planning, it actually, as a matter of cognitive science, makes people go brain dead. The human brain is not like it's not using NVIDIA chips. I mean, it's, the working memory is the conscious part of our brain is like an 8-bit processor. It can only retain so much.
You overwhelm it with rules, it loses the common sense.
It freezes it. It's called cognitive overload. There's actually a science. So the leading expert is a guy named John Sweller in Australia, and he and I work together now.
The second part of your book, you talk about how human authority is needed and talk about for good schools. I thought this was particularly interesting because, you talk about good schools need good cultures, and it's not about the rules as the cultures. But you also pointed out something I thought was interesting. In 36 states of our country, the donations by the public unions, which are trying to keep their own rules and their own power, the donations in those 36 states is bigger than all of the business donations combined. So these unions are completely in charge. And what are they doing to break things here? Tell us about it.
Well, first of all, that was the teachers union alone, not even the other public
unions. Just the teachers union alone is bigger than every business.
36 states, all other business groups. And of course, all the business groups have all completely different interests, right?
Yeah.
So imagine the preemptive power of a union that essentially buys the fealty of whoever's elected.
Yeah.
Well, the current governor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, 90% of his election funds came from the unions.
They're just completely in charge of him.
They're completely in charge, and so it's basically politically impossible in those states to make schools functioning again, and we have to have good cultures. So we've raised money to organize a constitutional challenge to teacher union controls. The basic theory, which is a well-established constitutional theory, is you can't delegate governing power to a private group.
Yep.
So we argue that collective bargaining laws and agreements delegate governing power to the teachers union. We elect a mayor to run the school system, and the mayor doesn't have any of the managerial tools needed to do that.
Yeah.
You can't fire a bad teacher. You can't allocate resources differently. The principal can't come in and and observe the teacher to see if they're doing a good job,
100%.
except with 7 days notice.
There's a special interest that's taken this away and broken it. So is this a constitutional question for states or for the national constitution?
We're arguing it under the United States federal Constitution because the state courts have all more or less been bought off.
Yeah.
So they've all said it's fine, but there is a well-known federal constitutional principle which is embodied in the idea of a Republican form of government. So, which means that voters elect someone who for a term of office must keep the authority to fulfill his public responsibilities.
Interesting.
And that applies to states and localities.
Interesting. So you're going to try to push this, and is this going to be a Supreme Court case you would try to push then?
Yes. So we've hired a law firm where we just finished a workshop that the Liberty Fund organized with some leading scholars to go over various nuances. We're developing a kind of breach of loyalty ethical argument as well. And so we're hoping to, we're working on a white paper, which I think is important to condition the market for this, on what the costs of unmanageability are. In other words, how much harm does it do the public if public agencies and schools can't be managed?
And they're so broken. They're so broken right now.
Yeah, they're so broken. And so we could use help thinking about that and figuring out how to do that. But we're at the beginning of doing this white paper, which we hope to do in the next 2 or 3 months on unmanageability. And then we already have a draft complaint that we're working on, that we developed. And so then we're going to go to the Trump administration and see if they would be the best plaintiff to do this.
Well, I'm eager to help you. We'll talk offline about this, how we push this forward. And if our listeners want to get involved in looking at this, is there somewhere they can go read more about it?
Sure. Well, commongood.org is our main place, but my personal email people are welcome to go to is, my middle name is King, so pkinghoward@gmail.com.
Amazing. Philip, the third part of the book I want to jump to, which actually relates a lot to the same themes, of course. You call it Escape from Quicksand, a new framework for modernizing America. Quicksand's an interesting metaphor here. We basically need to be able to start building things again without everything slipping away and being taken from us. And I remember we talked over a decade ago at one point, and you were telling me how it took over 10 years at least for infrastructure to be approved, and there's 20 different groups that can each harass you, and there's just no decision maker at all. It's just everyone harassing you with law. And I think the comical thing is even the Native American tribes could sue you and delay it for multiple years, right? It just is a total
in a place
mess.
they hadn't been in for 200 years.
So, geez, they hadn't been 200 years, and then when they were there, they probably had just recently conquered it from someone else, but they get to sue you too. The whole thing makes no sense. And so the idea is that modernizing our infrastructure requires a new framework based on a different operating philosophy. And it's interesting. I think you say in the book that we're all living under the infrastructure built by our great-great-grandfathers, basically, right?
Right. I mean, what are the odds today that you could get permission to build a rail line over the Sierra Nevada mountains?
There'd be 15 environmental groups, and who knows?
The odds are zero.
Yeah.
It would take 1,000 years. It would literally take 1,000 years. You would never do it. And yet the economy of this country literally rides on the UP, the Southern Pacific, the Northern.
100%. I think you said like the stuff going in and out of New York, they've taken like, it's going to take 30 years or something for them to have built the new capacity needed because of all the studies.
Right,
and all the
because a tunnel under the Hudson, which had already been the subject of environmental studies, is still taking 30 years to do. So you can't have a system where people simply trudge through a legal maze and expect anything to happen. Someone has to make choices.
I love this part in particular. I think these are things like we need all of our officials to study, and we're gonna have to publish this stuff later, Chris. You said there's 3 major changes needed to just restore authority here. 1 is a new legal framework we could talk about. 2 is new institutions that can inspire trust and ongoing decisions. And 3, you said we should put forward a special commission to design the details of this.
Right.
And this needs to be done. And I thought the new legal framework was really interesting. Obviously, you need like a key agency, a single agency to be in charge of you saying yes or no. Like that's critical. You can't have 18 people. And then they take all the other stuff, the 50 years of, you call it accumulated mandates. It's all the junk, all the rules. And instead of making them hundreds or thousands of rules, make them principles for everyone to follow. So you take that. And then you say the processes should be tools for transparency. I like that a lot. It's really important as someone who's worked with the government. We need to make sure their process is transparent, not that they're imposing things on you. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So the importance of process is mainly transparency. It's so when you're doing anything in life, you're making a judgment. It's always good to run it by somebody else, right? You're writing something, you let somebody look at it and maybe make some editorial suggestions. It's just the way of life. Husbands and wives agree, in my experience, on nothing. So you're constantly having to sort of interpolate, so what different points of view are fine. And that leads to kind of better. Danny Kahneman writes about this in his work.
We're having a lot of discussions with our 6 kids about the trip to Europe this summer already, about the dynamics around this.
Yeah,
exactly. There's a lot of interpolation.
Exactly. Let the 1-year-old decide. So it's important to have transparency, and environmental review is a good idea for that. But environmental review should focus on important items, not be this dense project of no pebble left unturned.
This is something that's like one of my biggest pet peeves, because whenever I talk about this, there's like some leftist in the comments is like, Joe just wants to pollute everything and make everything dirty and ruin our air and our water, and these evil Republicans it's like this person's just been watching Captain Planet nonstop for 30 years, and that's like their whole brain is Captain Planet has to stop us, but it's obviously not that we want pollution, is that you have to have a reasonable framework to get through it, right?
There is no project that doesn't in some way adversely impact the environment. Mm-hmm. The question is whether the benefits are worth it. It's like the transmission line in the forest, or the rail line over the Sierra Nevadas. If we didn't have those rail lines, how would those goods be served? They'd be on trucks spewing diesel fuel, smoke into the air. So the question is always one of trade-offs. And trade-offs cannot be decided as a matter of law. Trade-offs always involve judgment. And so you need to have transparency. You could do that in a matter of months with almost all projects.
Yep.
Then you have to have a decision maker. Then you have to have somebody, because nobody trusts anybody, who has power to overturn the decision maker.
That's the White House, maybe, in some cases.
Yeah,
if it's
maybe
really
the White
important.
House. And then the only role of a court is to decide whether in making those judgments, the person exceeded the scope of his authority.
And you actually say that we have to make sure we limit which courts could do things, because right now, like, every court reaches in and interferes, which is crazy.
Yeah, it's completely crazy. And by the way, the harm of this process is not just money and time. All these lengthy environmental reviews turn out to be dramatically harmful to the environment, because we can't fix the bottlenecks. We can't create the new transmission lines that carry electricity from the renewable sources and such. It's overwhelmingly harmful to the environment to have slow environmental reviews. But why is it that we can't get sufficient reforms? Because the environmental groups don't want to give up their veto.
Well, a lot of the environmental groups seem to be a special interest tied to environmental lawyers. They're trying to make a lot of money off of all this, like everything else, right?
And get power. So they say, well, we may support it if you give us this, or give us
a giant grant,
park over, or something, whatever it is. And I mean, not all environmental groups, but most of them have become insidious forces in our society.
It's really too bad, because I think all of us want a framework to protect the environment and protect. I have 6 young kids. I want them to have clean air and clean water and beautiful places to go. But at the same time, we have to be able to build in our society. It's interesting. One of my obsessions in business is doing things in areas that were almost impossible to do because the government was so bad. So when I've built things in defense or in healthcare, it turns out that if you can manage to get it done, the competition is not very good because the government's been so stopping it. So one of those areas in infrastructure, what that means, there's big gaps, of course, in our society because it's not allowed. So for example, Elon Musk's Boring Company, I'm obsessed with this because infrastructure is so hard to do. And he's made these tunnels so cheap that it becomes this like 100-to-1 return for society if you can get rid of traffic by building them. We just have to figure out how to get them allowed.
Right.
Which is, I think it's pretty fun right now.
Right, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, it's brilliant. And I was sitting on the plane next to a guy who runs a construction company. He's building the border wall between Mexico and Texas. So he's talking about the difficulty of one, getting permitting, and two, all the rigidities that are built into the labor rules and labor laws that double the cost of projects.
Double.
Yeah. So we're talking about this fantastic culture, America, where the American spirit, I think, is still alive and well, but where this kind of burden of red tape has sort of descended upon everything, and they're now encased in legal concrete. These unions have these rights, and these people have these rights, and this group has the right to veto. And so we're at this point where if we could simply not, quote, deregulate, but simply shed these interests and go back to the goals of the public, clean air, clean water, or whatever, and have effective mechanisms as if you were running a company, you could literally unleash unbelievable amounts of productive energy and money.
Yeah. And, and it seems, Philip, this stuff's all finally coming to a head in my view for a few reasons. So, a lot of us as builders in Silicon Valley, a lot of the talent in the world came to Silicon Valley, and we were able to build there because there wasn't red tape on the internet. And so I think a lot of Silicon Valley, attracted a lot of our best builders because it could build freely, right? Because it didn't have people in the way. We'd be doing things in a year that would take 10 years in another industry. And now what's happened is, thanks to where AI is going, and thanks to this push for robotics and advanced manufacturing, you're starting to see Silicon Valley and thanks to healthcare work, it's intersecting with all of these red tape and rules. And I think that's a lot of why a lot of people in Silicon Valley got what we call red pilled, where they came around and actually got involved in this administration because they said, wait a second, government's just breaking all of these things. And so you now have all these builders trying to actually build things in manufacturing and in healthcare and other areas. And so I think this is a really good time to hopefully teach some of these builders these frameworks, and guys like you who've been working on this for 25 years. Are you seeing more interest from Silicon Valley yet? And how do we kind of harness them into these principles? Because I think these smart people should be learning about these better.
Well, completely. And I think AI offers an incredible opportunity to overcome what is the ultimate source of distrust, in addition to special interest. I mean, the red tape, which is distrust. So you can use AI not only to help do things, but also to help validate things. Do these decisions make sense?
I'll tell you, I had a conversation, I won't say which one, but it was the prime minister of one of the Arab countries recently I was visiting with. And some of actually the Israelis who work with him and some of my friends had built him technology for the whole country, and that would make permitting only take 120 minutes. And so they're actually making the rule where when you try to get a permit in this country, ironically, like an autocratic regime, it now takes only 120 minutes because of AI. And I feel like maybe that's stuff we could do here as well.
Oh yeah, and it's not only for big stuff. I mean, some European countries have what they call one-stop shops for permits. Somebody wants to open a restaurant, wants to open a business. I mean, in New York, you've got to go to 11 different agencies to open a restaurant. I mean, it's like crazy. I mean, you really have to be a fanatic to
do a small business,
to survive the red tape. So we're so overdue for this kind of unleashing of human energy. My problem is that I don't think the political narrative is in the right place.
I see how a lot of these things, if we fix them, it actually creates more economic activity. It actually helps workers more, helps the environment more. Unfortunately, a lot of the populists on both sides say, oh, the unions are good for these, are good for these workers, therefore we're going to keep it. But the unions themselves are the ones that are breaking these things and violating these principles. How do I get it through to people? Like what's the right message for, we're going to help the workers, but we're not going to let the unions set us back with all this nonsense?
Right. Well, I mean, there is an art to that, and I do think you have to provide some sort of safety nets or assurances when you're in a period where there's dislocation.
Yes.
For example, people want affordable housing. You're not going to get affordable housing if all the tenants have the right never to move, and there are no rent increases. That's a formula for all the housing going downhill and having no place to build. So how do you solve that? Well, one way is to say, okay, you can build, but we're going to have a public program that helps you relocate to a appropriate sized apartment or something. Fine. But so you have to deal with the problems of dislocation, but the benefits of a dynamic marketplace doing things twice as efficiently will just benefit everybody.
How do we build back this trust in competent government and making government more competent again. You had a playbook. Can you start everywhere at once? Are there certain areas you think we should be focused on first?
I don't think you can't push a button, unfortunately. I think you can start in various areas with laws, and I recommend one in infrastructure, where Congress, for example, could pass a short law that says, notwithstanding any other law and regulation to the contrary, the way we will build transmission lines for the next 5 years is this. Bum, 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 bum. Federal preemption of state and local. You have clear hierarchies of decisions, and then you start making decisions. You have, I have to win my case in the Supreme Court on the teachers unions, but in general, what you want with schools is maximum alternatives and maximum ownership, by everyone, starting with the people who run the school.
Well, school choice is one version of that, of course.
Completely. There's an incredibly powerful movie that hasn't been released yet that David Osborne did on the charter schools in New Orleans. And what the great thing about this 90-minute movie is that it goes through the day and it shows the kind of choices that educators can make in a charter school and the kind of human interactions they can have. That's not possible
It's not allowed.
in most public schools.
It's not allowed. What do you think? You talked about the transmissions lines thing and notwithstanding everything else, what do you think is about regulatory expiration, about how regulations should have to go away unless they justify themselves somehow? Could tech help us do that better? Is this something you're interested in?
Well, first of all, it's a great idea. In my book, The Rule of Nobody, I recommended a constitutional amendment that required statutes to be that had budgetary impact to be reenacted every whatever 8 or 10 years or something. The problem in experience with what are called sunset laws is that the legislators are lazy, and when the sunset comes up, they have an omnibus reauthorization.
They just end up passing it all.
Yes, and so ultimately, I think a solution to a lot of what we're talking about. It does require a new framework, but it also requires the public to get more involved than we have in the last 50 years. My generation basically outsourced democracy to a professional class of politicians and lobbyists and people like that. All these insiders in Washington who do well just by keeping the status quo the way it is.
And they all play the game, and all the businesses pay them to do the thing for them and put the rule in for them.
Right. And so ultimately recreate a culture of kind of amateurs, real citizens, getting involved and having authority and doing things. We can't just say, don't be a jerk, because in Washington, literally their frame of reference is such that they can't unimagine the current system.
I like how you say amateurs. You had a book called Life Without Lawyers, and you're a lawyer. One of my favorite colonial stories, actually. Do you know about Savannah and what they did? So in the 18th century, Savannah was one of the first places in the South to ban slavery. It was unveiled later. And at the same time they banned slavery, they also banned professional lawyers. Which I think is pretty funny. And it's interesting. You reminded me of this by mentioning amateurs. And I think there is something to this, right? Because there's a danger of professional bureaucrats and professional lawyers like breaking things. So to talk about this a little bit.
Yeah. So, professionals all do things in a certain way and they don't innovate. They're not Silicon Valley. They're used to doing a certain way. They get comfort in how they're doing it. The people who made anvils and stirrups and that was their skill set, and then cars came along and now they had no job. So there needs to be a government that also is constantly a little insecure about the dislocation, and not so sure that it can. I mean, again, the conceit of the people in the 70s writing these laws to tell people how to live correctly and how to run a nursing home and a school and to fill out forms, and then to hire people to look at the forms that were filled out, and then to hire other people to make sure the person looking over the forms is looking over the form. So you have this kind of exponential jungle. That goes nowhere.
No, it's interesting. And it seems like in the 70s that was pushed by the union special interest, but also with just the wrong framework of the world in general of experts being in charge.
Yeah, and people were my generation was really guilty, and angry. We were guilty about finally waking up to racism. We were guilty about pollution. We were angry about the Vietnam War. The corporations lost all moral authority with unsafe cars. All that all came together in one decade. And so these legal geniuses thought they could just simply create democracy better than people.
No, and now we're learning about all the stuff that broke when you took it to the extreme. What gives you hope that your vision is possible? Is there a governor or other officials who are listening to you or doing some good things along these lines?
Am I just beating my head? A tycoon in New York asked me at lunch a couple of years ago, have you ever accomplished anything? So I said, well, now as you mentioned, I think I have a perfect record of failure. And he said, that's what I thought. I'm not going to give you any money. First of all, there are a lot of good young political leaders. Yeah, I was talking to the governor of Kentucky the other day. I have another guy I know well is a Democratic congressman who's running in Massachusetts, Seth Moulton, who's running for Ed Markey's Senate seat. Some really good young Republicans. Different state governor of Utah. But political leaders are lagging indicators. Mm-hmm. They don't actually start movements. So what's needed is a new narrative, and it's a narrative I think is a reboot narrative. It's not a It's not a get rid of government. Let's beat the shit out of them kind of narrative. It's well, let's make it work again, and then we'll get rid of stuff we don't need. But it's all about rebooting the system. I don't think we can. Well, there are all these Democrats coming out with books this year. Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson with Abundance, and Mark Dunkelman with Why Nothing Works, and they all highlight the idiocies that I've been highlighting for 30 years. Fine, they don't have any solution. And they don't have a solution, the same problem as Washington, because they think you can just cut some of it out. You can't cut some of it out and have it work. You can't prune a jungle.
Yeah.
The jungle grows back. So let's say you cut 80% of the rules and the processes. The 20% that's left is still mandatory.
Yeah. Did
you consult the Native American tribes? Did you satisfy them? Did you do the study of historic buildings?
Yeah.
All that's mandatory. So as long as you have a regulatory system that requires you to do things, you can't ever comply with it all. Anybody always has a reason to sue. So you actually have to replace it with a system that allows people to use their judgment.
I love it, Philip. We're actually seeing a couple governors later today who are here in town, and so we're always trying to teach these guys things. It gives me a lot of hope hearing about this from you. What makes you most optimistic we can get this done?
I think the American people are sensible, and most Americans know the system is broken. And one of the reasons they voted for Donald Trump is because he promised to drain the swamp, and he does have a kind of feral genius for identifying, all these idiocies, right? He just doesn't have to have a clear vision of what should replace it. So I think that if we can get the new narrative going, and get thinkers like yourself and Cicero and others involved in building a narrative, then I think people will come behind it because it makes sense.
Appreciate the common sense frameworks and the push for America. This is how it should work. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you.